Hello everybody, thank you Tina. My name is Craig Long, I'm Safety Advisor for G's Fresh and I want to talk to you about managing the people. G's Fresh as a business is a major supplier to all the major supermarkets, and over the summer months what you can see there is the amount of product that we have to supply. Now to consider this we had to think about so to maintain that supply chain, we had to consider the recruitment, the accommodation, the transport to and from work, training solutions, workstations, and pure and safety management systems. To give you an overall idea on recruitment, G's would require an additional 1,200 people to work for us during the summer months. Now, it's not been able or possible to attend recruitment events due to the lockdown. We've had travel restrictions, closed borders, and we've even had flights cancelled at the last minute. We've also had to contend with Germany, who opened their seasonal labour market earlier than usual. The only means that really has been available to us is the online advertising using the hashtag #FeedTheNation. So on the recruitment side, we had to screen people when they arrived. We had to make sure that the people were separated, and then we had to consider the transporting of people from the airport. As a business, we normally look at around about 65% of our people who were employed last year returning. We're currently sitting at around 40%. Of the UK-based people who applied, we've currently got 265 people employed. We've got 400 applications being processed, and out in the field at present, I've got 9 UK teams. G's is in a very fortunate position. We have 4 hostels with a capacity of 1,460 people, and we developed a plan. We treated each of our teams, so our planting teams, our harvest teams, as a family group. So they work together, they eat together, and they actually share the accommodation together. We've had to bring in additional fridges and cabinets, cabins to stock food, to minimise travel onto supermarkets. And we've also developed cleaning procedures for equipment that would be shared, such as kitchen areas and shower rooms. Daily, we're doing daily temperature checks, and we've also got rooms set aside for isolation. So the pictures that you can see there, so the top picture is one of our kitchen areas, which has been segregated, so we can have 2 teams in there. There's a plastic strip curtain going across the middle, so we can have 1 team on one side, 1 team on the other. The bottom left is the shower cubicles that we've had to hire in, and the bottom right is the laundry room, which has been segregated. On the transport side of things, we had to consider entry and exit plans for buses, pick-up and drop-off points had to be reviewed, and we've had seats taped off or removed to maintain that 2-metre social distance. And certain farms I have, where the hostels are close to the fields, we've got people who are actually cycling to work. On the training side of things, classroom training, so we had to rearrange our training rooms and seating arrangements to maintain that 2-metre social distancing. And we also had to consider the field inductions and the tractor driver training. So the picture on the left there is showing the field induction, where we've got people 2-metre social distancing. And to deliver this tractor driver training, we set aside areas in the field where we would actually do our tractor driver training. On the harvest rigs that we have, to maintain the social distancing, or where social distancing couldn't be maintained, we put up plastic screens. So we have screens within the header where the product is cut, and then on the platform where it's packed, we put screens in place where I said we couldn't maintain that 2-metre social distancing. On the planters, again, there's an area where we couldn't maintain the 2-metre social distancing, so plastic screens were put up, and again in factories at the end of packing lines we put plastic screens in to maintain that 2-metre social distancing. Some of the other issues that we had with the workstations, that what we found with the screens that we put up, they tended to fly around in windy weather, so we've had to weight them. We've made sure that teams are issued with the facial coverings, And where people and visitors, such as myself, are not part of the family group, it is mandatory to wear a face covering when visiting a harvest rig or a planter. Because we made modifications to our planting equipment and our harvest equipment, we had to make sure that we reviewed the pure assessments as the modifications as they were made. Those were the practical solutions, but then we also had to think about our safety management system. So under the safety management system, we created a new folder called COVID-19. And in there, we put posters that the business units could use, the procedures, the risk assessments, and some toolbox talks to keep the awareness going. So as I said, the new policies and procedures were developed. So we had to develop new procedures and policies for shared equipment, such as planters, harvest rigs, canteen trailers, toilets, and tractors. We've completed a COVID-19 risk assessment, and we've also done an action tracker. So everything that we've done, we've tracked what we've done. So whether we've put screens up, additional sanitizer stations, screen wash, things like that, everything has been tracked. We've also developed a COVID-19 induction, so any new person coming to the business is inducted and made aware of what those procedures are. And we've also put in additional control measures for contractors and delivery drivers. So what we're currently seeing is that when contractors submit their RAMs for the task, or the risk assessments and method statements for the task that they're doing, they're actually covering COVID-19 within that risk assessment and method statement. Delivery drivers, where drivers are sort of on site, so it's key controls, maintaining rest areas, and it's staggering start times. So having early start times, late start times. So those are some of the practical measures that we at GEES have done. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Craig. We have had, Craig needs to leave us quite quickly today, but what I want to do, if possible, Craig, can we just keep you for another minute or two? Just had a couple of questions in that I might ask, if that's okay. Yeah. So first one that we've had has come in from Kathy Ricketts, and she's saying, how do you get around the additional data protection requirements with regard to temperature checks?
So we are doing daily temperature checks. So we've brought the thermometers. So the people that are based in the hostel, they are temperature checked before they leave for work on a daily basis. For the UK crews that are coming in from their own homes, they are temperature checked when they arrive on the field. So any temperature above a certain temperature, they're into isolation. And we're also checking for any signs or symptoms as well.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for that. I hope that that's answered your question, Kathy. And just one more, if you wouldn't mind. And this one's coming from Gillian McLean. And she says, how's the government's plan to introduce a 14-day quarantine for new arrivals to the UK going to affect your business? Or do you already have all of the overseas workers that you need in place?
Okay, so as I said, we're in a fortunate position where we've got 4 hostels. We've obviously brought in additional cabins. One of my sites out at East Coast near Great Yarmouth in Norfolk has actually hired a holiday camp. So we've got people who are in the hostels there, but we have set aside certain numbers of rooms for isolation in case we get any suspected cases.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Craig. And thanks for the presentation. I'm sure everybody found something in there that was really useful. Any other questions that come in for Craig, we will put them to him after this webinar and we'll get them answered and put on the website. So thanks very much, Craig.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's given us a good introduction to the webinar and shown some really practical solutions in there, especially the screens and things between each of the stations and how they're dealing with people as family groups. What I'd like to do now is introduce Mike Barraclough. He's a senior risk manager with QBE Insurance, and he's got a wealth of experience in the industry. He's been working in it for many years. I won't hint as to how many. And he's going to give us information on practical steps we can take in respect of risk management. So I'd now like to hand over to Mike, if you'd like to start sharing your video and unmute yourself, please, Mike.
Thanks, Tina. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen hopefully with you in a second. Hope you can all see that. I'm Mike Barraclough from QBE. We're a specialist business insurer. And I'm going to talk about some of the practical steps that we as an insurer would expect from some of our clients. And I'm going to spend 5 minutes at the end as well using my crystal ball to try and have a look at what some of the potential issues might be as we go into perhaps the claims scenario further down the line and what liability might look like. So how can we start returning to work? Well, the intention is to keep this fairly simple. I have included at the end of the slide pack a hyperlink to our website, which has got lots of detailed information on there for you to be able to view at your leisure. And it covers all the sectors and industrial sectors in different levels of detail. So that's perhaps the best place to go, but we'll keep this relatively simple and high level if we can. And what I want to just perhaps make the point here is that planning is key to a successful and sustained return to work. And you shouldn't rush this process because getting this right may very well mean a very successful and sustained return to work. So let's have a look around some of the planning and preparation. I think it's really important that you put together a leadership team. And I'd mix that up. My recommendation would be that you've got some of the senior managers, maybe even a director, but also some of the line managers and supervisors to help start planning the process of bringing people back into work. You need to arrange a pre-occupancy inspection of the premises and to arrange a deep clean before you start to bring the workforce back in. So that's one of the key points to remember. And if you're using a cleaning contractor, you'll need to train them as to what your key contact points will be and where the focus needs to be on the preparation for cleaning and the ongoing processes around that. Review any service which might provide a health and safety issue and how you can minimise risk. I'm particularly concerned myself, and I haven't seen too much publicity around it, but Legionella for me is a big issue here. We've had an unseasonably warm spring, and if your premises have been closed for a good 2 months and the water system's not being used, then these are ideal breeding grounds for Legionella, so you need to have a focus on that. Also, you need to be testing all your emergency equipment, such as your fire alarms, your smoke detectors, your first aid kits, and the sprinkler systems if you've got one. And you'll also need to look at the machinery and plant and equipment exposures that you've got. So I'm particularly concerned here about the statutory testing of lifting equipment under the LOLA regulations, any exhaust ventilation that you might have on any of your equipment, and any pressure systems. So if you've got compressed air systems in your premises, things like that are covered by statutory inspection, and of course the heating and ventilation there. So if we move on to the actual premises, among the leadership team, you need to agree amongst yourselves as to whether or not it's actually possible to maintain social distancing. You need to be looking at the workplace distancing and whether you can improve that around the workplace. Look at the agreed routines around that and avoid small meetings in offices. You need to pay particular attention, I think, to your stairways, your lifts and your escalators where space is difficult to maintain that 2 metre recommended guidance. If you can do, I'd suggest you look at stairs in one direction going up and perhaps coming down on another if that's possible. And if you cannot use lifts, I would imagine that's probably the best way to go. You need to look at some of the travel arrangements and how people are going to get in and out of work in the first place as well, and encourage people not to use public transport in accordance with government guidance. And you need to identify the key touch points within the building, so the various doors and handles and windows that are likely to be opened and used and people touching all the time, and to have good sanitation and cleaning routines around all of those particular points. I think one of the key areas as well is getting people in and out of work. I'd suggest you look at staggering times for people starting work and not bringing everybody in at one particular time, and as well, of course, when leaving work. So that might mean working longer hours, but I suggest that's probably preferable to, as I say, bringing everybody in for an 8 o'clock start or a 9 o'clock start. Buildings, entrances, if you can, if it's possible to have a one-way in and a one-way out of the building, that would be ideal. And also a one-way system of moving around the building would help to maintain social distancing. Any space where food is being prepared is a critical area for you to consider. I'd suggest that you ask people to bring a pre-packed lunch with them and perhaps not use any cooking and food preparation areas. Insofar of having meetings with clients and customers and the like, this can all be done by technology, so there shouldn't be any need to be bringing people onto the premises apart from approved contractors. So let's have a look at some of the communication. We know communication is key to enabling everybody to understand what's going on. Our recommendation would be that you put together, as part of your planning, an induction for staff returning, so that you can identify all the new work changes that you've brought in. The alterations to the risk assessments and the safe systems of work will need to be communicated to them so that they understand it and they can ask any questions around that. You need to explain to them that you might be altering the hours of work, but that again, this is for their own safety and for their colleagues' safety. So you'll be staggering times of coming to work, staggering times leaving work. Meal breaks won't be all taken together, and toilet and washroom use will need a careful plan. You need to encourage people to join in with all of this, so I ask them to volunteer ideas, to report any problems and issues once they have come back, so that you can reflect and review how it's going. And I think you need to communicate to them as well that you're also going to have supervisors and managers monitoring social distancing throughout the workplace, and that nobody needs to be offended if they're asked to move a little bit further apart. I think it's also important to keep refreshing the communication, and one of the best ways of doing this will be using your communication boards and your health and safety notice boards around the site, updating the messages frequently and perhaps just changing it and freshening it up. I always think humour is a good one and usually works well. So ensure health and hygiene is maintained, and inform staff that they've got an individual responsibility as well to work with you. Business recovery is a key stage. Managers need to monitor the effectiveness of how it's working in the first few days when you've brought people back, and to make changes where necessary, and perhaps to review your business continuity plan. But these are some of the key focus areas where the planning is absolutely important. So if you can get those initial stages right, the development of your new risk assessments and safe systems of work, the deep cleaning and the hygiene focus there, that maintaining of social distancing within the workplace as best you can, and keeping people apart and continuing to communicate that to the employees, I think you'll be going a long way to developing a successful plan and a successful return to the workplace. Now, one of the issues I did want to move on to, and just using crystal ball, and we get asked around quite frequently by clients, is what kind of claims do we anticipate being made, and perhaps what might be done. One of the points I want to mention to you is that throughout your planning process and any documents, risk assessments and safe systems of work that you're going to alter, it's absolutely critical that you document everything that you've done and record it. Because ultimately, when it comes to liability or any claims that might be coming down the line in the future, it's entirely about what you can prove you did and not what you say you did. So the documentation and an audit trail of documents is absolutely critical. So please don't forget to record it and keep all the changes necessary. I think claims for contracting COVID-19 infection against an employer will be very, very difficult for anybody to establish, because there are so many other places where infection could take place. So I don't think we anticipate an actual claim for infection against employers as being something that will be particularly common. As I say, proving causation will be very difficult. There is, of course, a duty on the employer to provide a safe place of work, and that might be challenging in these times. But the big focus, I think, from liability aspects will be maintaining cleanliness and hygiene, and standards that you've imposed need to be continually checked and maintained. I can see issues around social distancing in the workplace and how that might be managed. There is, of course, an onus on you to keep people at that recommended 2 metre distance. If that's not reasonably practicable for some of the processes and tasks that you might have to undertake in the workplace, then all you need to do there is document within the risk assessments the steps you've taken. So perhaps people working back to back or side to side rather than being face to face would be preferable. Provision of PPE, I can see issues being raised in the future around that, around the replenishment of it, the suitability of it, and the effectiveness of it, which is where you'll need to keep a close supply chain and the PPE that you're issuing, that it's effective for what you're trying to control. I can see some other issues potentially around mental health, which one of our speakers is going to address shortly, straight after me. But I can see claims perhaps in the future coming around stress and anxiety in the workplace. Some people, of course, might not particularly want to go back to work, but feel the need to do. So that'll be one of the areas we'll be keeping an eye on. The other one I think is perhaps home workers. If you've had people working from home in the meantime, rather than actually in the workplace, and whether or not they've been provided with the correct equipment. So you have chairs, height adjustable chairs, all the usual computer aids that we're used to in the office. There's no requirement for an individual risk assessment for temporary working from home. The unfortunate aspect of that is nobody's actually defined what temporary is, whether that's 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, who knows. So there could potentially be some problems around that. I certainly think we'll be seeing claims for musculoskeletal disorders. These could come from new working practices if you've had to alter your safe working systems to keep people apart, or you've actually altered the layout of some of the machinery and the equipment. People who've been used to working in a simple way without any problems can soon actually contract a musculoskeletal problem by very small changes to their work. So I definitely see that perhaps as being a problem area, as well as, of course, there might be fewer staff in the workplace as well. So people might be lifting more frequently. They might be lifting slightly heavier weights by themselves than they have been used to. So I think that's one area to keep a focus on. And then I think finally, the other one will be that perennial problem that we've always had will be around slips and trips. Slips and trips account for about 1/3 of all the employer's liability claims that we see. So I think one of the problems might be trips from people who are following unfamiliar traffic routes. If you've had to alter the way people enter the workplace, how they move around it, they might not be familiar with some of the traffic routes that they're having to use. So housekeeping and keeping things, walkways clear will be really important in the future until people get used to this new way of working. But hopefully I've given you a snapshot there of some of the key areas that I think you'll need to plan in detail around before you bring people back, and some of the potential liability issues going forward. And if you use that link on the screen there for the QBE website, there's some more detailed guidance around COVID related issues, returning to work and how you manage that. Then in far greater detail than I've been able to express to you in these sort of 10-15 minutes. So I think that's me handing back to you, Tina.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. Been some really great points in there, and some things that I hadn't even thought of or contemplated, and I'm sure that lots of people would say the same, to be honest. Interesting that you picked up on the phased return, I think because that's what a lot of people are wondering about in phased return. And just this morning I saw something about employers being encouraged to bring their people back maybe on short hours initially, because some people, especially who've been furloughed, haven't done any work at all for the last 10 weeks potentially, and then to come back to a full 8-hour working day might put more additional mental stress on them when they're being expected to step back into it. Is that something that you've picked up on, or something that you've heard people talking about?
It is something I've heard people pick on. And I'd also make the point here, it's perhaps not just around the mental well-being, but also the sort of the physical aspect. If people have been in a physically demanding job and then they suddenly had 2.5 months off, and their physical fitness might have dipped because if you've been adhering to the 1 hour exercise outside for most people, then I think that's it's really important that you perhaps do look at just how many hours people work until they get their physical strength and stamina back.
Great, yeah, brilliant. I mean, there was one question that came in that was particularly relevant to one of yours, and it might be one of those where we all sort of think, really, are people doing this? But the question was put forward that some employers are apparently using plywood instead of plastic screens, and obviously there's a question around how you can possibly keep those sanitized and clean. Have you heard anything about that, or from a risk management point of view, what would be your approach to that if an employer said, I'm going to put plywood screens up?
Well, I've got to say, I've not heard that one, but that's the really valid point there is cleanliness and hygiene and sanitisation is going to be absolutely critical to employers and keeping people safe and reducing the risk of infection. And cleaning wood is very, very difficult to clean it effectively. It might look clean, but there's so many nooks and crannies in a piece of wood, it'd be impossible. Plastic tends to be more durable, and it is easier to clean and to wipe down and to sanitize. So my advice would be to steer away from wood if at all possible, and to use either plastic or stainless steel or lightweight aluminium. Brilliant.
Thanks for that, Mike. You can stop sharing now. If you'll stick around with us for questions at the end, I'm still encouraging everyone to ask any questions that come up using the Q&A function on your Zoom, and we'll put the questions to the panel at the end. Our next pair of speakers that we have for you are Andy Slosh, who's Health and Safety Advisor, and Bridget Holton, Wellbeing Officer for Forestry and Land Scotland. Now, I did just see something pop up on my screen to say Bridget may have left, so she may be having connection problems, but hopefully she's still with us. Andy's also a member of the Rural Industries Group Committee and has been providing valuable information to us during this lockdown period as to how the forestry sector has been impacted. And he's going to now talk to us about some practical measures that the forestry sector have been taking to keep their people working and working safely. And Bridget's then going to talk to us about the mental health issues that employees may face or that they're having to deal with. So if I could now invite Andy and Bridget to come online and go ahead with your presentation, please.
Thanks, Tina. Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Sloss, Health and Safety Advisor for Forestry and Land Scotland. With me is Bridget Holton, who just messaged me there to say she get kicked out, but she is connecting in again. But I'm just going to give her an introduction to our organisation to give you a scale and scope of it, and then go through a wee bit of how we're thinking about mental health and wellbeing in our people. And then Bridget is going to give an overview of what we've been doing through this period and beforehand, which has really helped us out. So our organisation, we're an agency of Scottish Government, and we look after about 9% of Scotland's land area. About 66% of that's forested, and another 33% is open habitat. So we have quite a broad scope of things that we do in looking after the land, which means we have a lot of different types of job roles and employees. So with that comes different experiences and professionalisms. But more importantly, because we cover the whole country, we can have people living in urban environments away to the far northern and western, very remote environments. So when we're thinking about dealing with people, there can be different views and different ways of interaction, and even something as simplistic in this period just now of internet communication. So some people don't really have very good connections. So some of it has been a bit difficult, but we'll go through some examples we've had, how we've tried to get around to that. Just to start us off, and a lot of this will be probably preaching to converted, but there's a lot of things we've learned through this process about how humans interact and how humans deal with a global pandemic. It's a very challenging time. So we always have stress in life, and it's a way that we deal with things. It's a necessary emotion, if you like, that we deal with emergencies, we deal with challenges, we deal with issues, and largely we can cope with it and use it as a tool. But we have this work-life balance, and what we tend to see in health and safety and deal with is the workplace issue. What do we do in the workplace? What are we responsible for? But when we talk about mental health and well-being, it's a human thing, so it's a life aspect as well. And you start to see those merging in together. Sometimes people can bring stress from their life into work with them, but the thing we absolutely have to avoid is that people don't take stress out of work into their life with them, so that it starts to become a personal life damaging effect, if you like. And so what we want to avoid is these, trying as much as possible, not letting these things grow too much that it becomes all-consuming. If we think about it in the very basic sense of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this is an absolutely perfect demonstration of what we can use just now. And normally it's maybe fair to say that in the workplace, we tend to rely on the bottom three levels of the triangle that's dealt with at home, if you like. And we kind of look at the self-actualization and the esteem as the workplace performance, if you like. But if we look at this current period just now, the physiological needs in particular, so thankfully we have plenty of air and water to go around. But when you think about food, so the first couple of weeks of lockdown, shelves were empty, basic essentials were missing. You know, they can go through a whole list of things that people were struggling to find. You have to queue to get into shops. Shelter is a big one, and that comes into safety needs and employment and resources, where people are worrying about, can I pay my mortgage? Can I pay my rent? Am I going to have a roof over my head? People are losing sleep because very naturally there's anxieties around this period, and that starts to compound over time. And you start bringing that into work with you, and it starts affecting work performance. And then it becomes this self-perpetuating issue. If we look at the key one here is probably around love and well-being, love and belonging, When you look at friendship, intimacy, family and sense of connection, again, people tend to have that in their home lives through social clubs or groups they're part of. They'll have friends, they'll have family, but the biggest thing about this period is the lockdown has taken that away. We're starting to move out of that, but 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks that we've been in this now, people have really lost that connection. And at the start of it, it was very, very challenging. And we found that in our offices in particular, where there was tight close-knit groups, it affected them more. And when we were having conversations with our colleagues, they were talking about things we've never heard them talking about before, genuine fears. Even people who you wouldn't expect to open up about these things were talking about them. So a key thing for us was to try and develop some kind of love and belonging in a community, albeit through Skype and Zoom, and trying to build some local communities there to give a bit of connection. The key thing that follows from this as we go out of the lockdown period that we need to have sight of and be ready for is, before the lockdown, typically if we take an analogy of a gear stick, people are cruising along in 5th gear, they're fairly comfortable, maybe down at 4th gear. Around about the time we start to talk about lockdown, you start to get a bit concerned and you start to drop down the gears to 3rd gear, and you get all the way down to complete lockdown, particularly our frontline staff who were not out and about. We didn't furlough anybody, but we need to appreciate that people were furloughed. And, you know, again, with the analogy, dropping down to 1st gear, sitting neutral. And the reason that's important is, just like you were driving a car, you wouldn't go from 1st gear straight up to 5th gear again, because you would end up stalling the car. And we need to think about people in the same way. You can't just ramp straight up to 100% right off the bat. For us in forestry, we're looking at about Monday next week, we'll potentially start getting moving again. But for us, we're having to do that very, very gradually, one bit at a time, and take it step by step. On the other end of the spectrum of that, there's people who've been sitting in 4th or 5th gear who, in our team, health and safety, HR, and our wider kind of people team, as we call them, have been going hell for leather right from the start, rewriting guidance, working out testing, how do we reopen the business afterwards. Those people are just important as well, because they've been running at a high rate for that 8, 9, 10 week period, and they're at risk of running out of fuel or burning out. So we need to look at both ends of the spectrum and try and meet somewhere in the middle, and then gradually build up, taking consideration of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to build on that and take the sort of physiological and safety needs to give a good foundation. And that's really important, just again as another analogy. So we're very good at solving problems, and we're probably good at that in our profession. In forestry, we're really good at innovation, but as much as you can solve a problem, they can have lasting effects, even though you fix it. And we need to be careful, particularly with mental health, that those things tend to stick with people and they'll carry them with them. And it will start to change attitudes over time. The more you can bring people along, the better, right from the start. I should add as well that wire rope was definitely thrown away afterwards. So Bridget looks like she's dropped out again, so I'm just going to go through some of her slides just now and start us off. What's helped us in Forestry and Land Scotland is we'd started on a mental health and wellbeing action plan a couple of years ago, which is really what Bridget has been leading on, and it's really helped us to try and work out some key aims. So we had to address root causes of poor mental health and work-related stress and look at what those drivers were. We wanted to improve awareness and attitudes and practices across the organisation and support staff to access the resources and support they need. And that's from employee assistance programmes or signposting external resources. And where we've got to now is we've got to the level of senior management meetings that mental health and wellbeing is a standing item on those meetings. And pretty much most of the work we try and do, we try and have some kind of mental health and wellbeing aspect to consider as we go through that. Just to sort of drill down to that a wee bit more, so organisational responsibility, we want to review and update policies and procedures, align them with HSE requirements, divvy up the responsibility across teams and deliver training for line managers, and that includes mental health first aid training for our managers as well, just so they're a bit better at identifying early indicators of stress or anxiety or poor mental well-being. We've been delivering training, stress risk assessments and people surveys. The stress risk assessments have been really good because we're promoting them not as a way of identifying stress and diagnosing it, if you like, but in a way of finding triggers and dealing with them first of all before we get to the level of developing stress. We've got an employee assistance programme which we reviewed, and we're monitoring and evaluating that as well. Welcome back, Bridget, I see you're back. I'll just finish this slide and I'll pass over to you, okay?
Yeah.
And changing culture and communications, so signposting, using as much as possible to try and make people aware of resources that are out there, having campaign days and trying to get the conversation going, because that's always the hardest thing at first. And we worried a wee bit about getting those conversations going, but actually when you get them going, it's a struggle to, there's a lot of discussion that goes on. So Bridget, I'll pass over to you just now if I jump onto the next slide.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. Sorry about the technology at this end. Yeah, so just to emphasise, I was listening on the phone, so I heard a bit of what Andy was saying, but we're really basing our approach on Farmer Stevenson review and other literature reviews that brings in a whole spectrum of the approach. So saying, yes, we're doing wellbeing initiatives, but we don't want to just be doing the free fruit stuff. We want to be embedding a health and safety behavioural change approach. So using a similar sort of IOSH approach of sort of plan, do, check, act, and really embedding responsibility and roles, getting manager buy-in. I think if you click on the slide, there's a quote that will just come up at the bottom, Andy, about leadership being really important and starting there, getting that buy-in. And unfortunately, one of the things that we were due to do just in March but couldn't go ahead was all of our senior leaders were due to gather for a day, really not just awareness raising, but also looking at actions towards addressing stress at the root cause within the workplace. So yeah, we've got that spectrum of approach. Yeah, thanks, Andy, that's great. Partly informed by this is that often you hear within wellbeing workplace worlds this word of resilience, which obviously is an important thing on an individual level, but within a workplace it can be seen to be you know, similar to putting the responsibility on the employees' shoulders for PPE, to put the responsibility for mental and emotional and social stress on the individual rather than the employer. So, you know, that says, yeah, no one's going to be able to cope with a toxic environment. So really making sure that we create psychologically safe, mentally healthy workplaces. That's at the core of our strategy and approach. Thanks, Andy. Yeah. So what have we done? Lots of things. So this is specifically within, we wanted to focus on what we've been doing since lockdown. So we put out initially sort of lots of external resources and what was needed, made sure everyone was getting paid and those kind of underlining things that might have been causing stress. And then we put out a survey, a national survey, and got about 100 responses to allow us to see what was being used, what was still needed, what concerns people had, whether or not the guidance was being used or clear. So we had put out guidance for line managers to be having conversations with people who had childcare responsibilities, for example, emphasising that, you know, they shouldn't be trying to work full time at this time. But what we found in the survey was people still feeling like they had to be trying to do 30, 40, some of our people are contracted for 44 hours, you know, and the sort of national team were very much clear that that shouldn't be happening, but it hadn't trickled down. So we put a sort of frequently asked questions response out after that survey saying, okay, these are some anonymized case studies of what people are saying is happening, and this is what our advice would be. Yeah, so we responded to those, and that's great. What's next? Yeah, so we've had to work really closely with the other people in the people team. So equality and diversity, also learning and development. We got lots of new training online. We promoted the use of the employee assistance program and worked closely with them to put on some additional webinars. So those webinars happened over the last few weeks. They were based on the information that we got in the wellbeing survey. So people asking for, you know, what happens at this time if I'm bereaved, either because of COVID-19 or otherwise. You know, what happens at funerals? Will I get special leave? So having a webinar with both the kind of emotional support as well as policy advice on that and providing new guidance. So like Andy said, we have been pretty flat out busy in our team doing both responding to mental and physical health. Then we had one on finances that was poorly attended in some ways, and in terms of we've got a network of mental health first aiders. And I think there's still barriers, obviously, to the stigma around mental health, as well as money and managing money, and people owning up and saying, actually, I'm worried about this for whatever reason. But the one on sleep was oversubscribed. Lots of people really needing help with that at this time. So we put on additional resources for that because of Mental Health Awareness Week as well. But yeah, we also put out guidance and did a drop-in session for any managers to come into a drop-in webinar to say exactly how to have the difficult conversations that maybe people still aren't trained or comfortable having, more around anxiety or mental health, and how that crosses into behavioural stuff, how it crosses into productivity, performance issues, but just working with our people team to have an open conversation about that. Yeah, that's great. Next slide, thanks. Yeah, we put on additional e-learning packages for a lot of people in the survey said, oh, you know, I'm stood down, but I'm looking for things to do, and I'd love to be able to help with the central team. So we've opened opportunities to do that and expand their CPD. We've got a network of mental health first aiders. So in the approach, you know, we've got the reactive support, we've got proactive support, but having mental health first aiders in every office, on every site, you know, all the way down into all the way up in Leicester, up near Thurso, or, you know, quite a few around Edinburgh, but over on Mull, just making sure that there's someone in every office who is advocating for, as well as able to respond in a crisis, able to ask the difficult questions. And the peer support for them is usually monthly, but we've upped that to weekly. and it's largely a peer support led group, yeah. And then Mental Health Awareness Week, which would usually be a very big week for us in terms of a campaign week, and the mental health first aiders would act as advocates and organise events. They got very busy creatively doing virtual coffee mornings, writing blogs, having forums, doing the wellbeing webinars, and the themes were sleep, so we did a lot of things on sleep, but also kindness and acts of kindness. So we had a nominations process where people could nominate the acts of kindness, and then they would receive a e-card to acknowledge and celebrate that. So, you know, as part of a kind of lighter touch side of things, and sharing, you know, sharing positive news and things, but also saying this is a cultural change as well, in terms of making mental health something that people feel able to ask for help around and bring up at work. You know, that's not going to happen in a workplace where it's not psychologically safe to do so. So it has been a difficult time, but there has been a lot of strength kind of working together and building on this. And yeah, like Andy's written in the slides, there's been a real increase of people pulling together locally, and yeah, a lot of the people work in very close-knit rural communities anyway, so that peer support is very important, as well as the EAP as anonymous support. Great, yeah, thanks Andy. So this is a photo of me. Maybe you can't see me right now, but this was for Mental Health Awareness Week. So we did, some people's made some little green ribbons or bought them from the Mental Health Foundation. And then if you just click again, that's me swimming in the sea down in Portobello in Edinburgh, just after a swim. So saying exactly like, what is it that we're doing to keep ourselves well during this time? And it's not actually the presenteeism of sitting at a laptop. It's saying, for those of us that can work flexibly and do what we need to stay well as asking for support. So this is something that one of the mental health first aiders shared. A single act of kindness throws out roots in all directions, and the roots spring up and make new trees. So that the sense that actually, maybe specifically at this time as well, when we're in a time of crisis and transition, we don't know the acts that are going to be making the difference. To really, we can take all the practical precautions, like our first speaker said, and do all the kind of protective things that we can to make sure people are safe. And also, yeah, a lot of what we do at this time will ripple out in different ways. So that's a lot of what we do in our team, is a real kind of behavioural cultural change approach, and hopefully that informs a little bit of what has helped you understand what we do. And I think it's really shown us that there's things that we've learned during this time that we want to take forward, maybe in terms of some of the virtual learning things that we do, some of the ways in which we've had to ask for help. And so the question we wanted to leave you with was, what are you doing individually or collectively as an organisation? What are you going to take from this time that you want to carry forward? Thanks for listening. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Bridget.
That was brilliant. Thanks, Andy, and to Bridget, overcoming your technology problems, which is always a major issue, isn't it, on anything like this, but you overcame it beautifully, so thank you very much for that. I mean, I certainly learned from that, and I hope other people did. We have had some questions in, so if you both wouldn't mind just hanging around, and I'll come back to those questions in a moment. But we've now heard from all of the speakers today, and I hope that we've managed to achieve our aim of today, which was to give you some practical advice and some practical measures and steps that you can take forward. We are going to give the opportunity to post any questions to our panel now. Now, I know that some people don't like always typing in their questions, so we are going to open up the raise a hand and ask the question if people would feel more comfortable doing that. But just as we do that and we sift through some of the questions, we're also going to launch a poll for you, because your feedback on our webinars is really important to us. So if you could answer those poll questions that would be brilliant, just to give us that feedback while I run through some of the questions. So a couple of the questions that we have on the Q&A. So I've got here, would the slides be provided to us, from Andrew Green? And yes, we will be sending out a link to the presentation recording to the email address that you registered. So please look out for that email. The whole presentation, the whole webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. So that will be available to watch as well later on, and it will also be available by the IOSH website. One of the questions I've had here to Bridget, if you're there, is during the lockdown, what if any outreach programmes have Forestry and Land Scotland done to reach out to employees at home to assess and support their mental health?
Thanks. I guess in terms of, we had a very clear line from leadership that everyone should be in contact with their line manager on a daily basis at first, and then dropping down to a weekly basis. And with that, there was a sort of conversation guide to offer those line managers who still didn't feel comfortable to ask maybe more personal questions. And that it was, so that was a sort of making sure that everyone had been contacting, that no one was left behind approach. Similarly, the approach of the mental health first aiders is a network of grassroots sort of across the whole organisation. So cutting across the sort of hierarchical chain, there's this flatter network of peer support approach, and they began a more proactive approach. So often they would be quite reactive, reacting to signs and symptoms, but we recognised, okay, we're not seeing people in the office, so we might not know or be able to spot anything. So especially during mental health awareness week, people were encouraged to call someone they might not normally call, check in with someone who they would maybe see in the office, but don't have a reason to work with necessarily. And we have tools, so we use the stress risk assessment tools, and we adapted that based on feedback from staff about kind of what was most helpful for them. So it is based on the HSC approach, but it has some additional questions in there. There's two versions. There's the Word document, and there's also a sort of spreadsheet one which can track your changes. And we also use a wellbeing action plan or a wellness action plan, which was developed through Recovery Networks, which is a person-centered approach to say, when I'm well, I look like this, and when I'm not well, I look like this, or I feel like this, or I sound like this, or I act in this way, and I give you permission to check in on me, you know, in these ways, if I'm appearing unwell to you in whatever way. So using those tools to encourage those conversations. But I do, you know, it has been, you know, a worry for us that there may be some people really isolated, and that's why exactly kind of using both line manager communication and peer support networks. Yeah, that's probably the most that we've tried to do at this time. Thanks for the question though.
Brilliant. That's great, thank you. There is another question that's come in for Andy. If we can try and answer this one quite quickly, and it's we need to transport equipment to the working site, such as rotavators. Some of these are really heavy, and a two-person lift is required. It's impossible to maintain social distancing during the manual handling process. Any views on the dilemma? Now, obviously, it might be a longer answer, and if you want to defer Andy to answering that in writing, then I appreciate that, because we've got literally 2 minutes left, and we need to just wrap up the session as well. So, yeah.
I'd probably be able to give a better answer written or a more lengthy one, but yeah, we've considered that, and we do have some scenarios where mechanics is our example, where they're doing repairs on machinery, harvesting machinery, and they have a benefit of already having RPE, which is obviously the bottom of the scale. But if it's absolutely necessary and it can't be done by other mechanical means, then you go through that hierarchy of control and get to that point to try and get to that. So that's our last resort, but always mechanisation if we possibly can.
Okay, well, brilliant. We'll go for a longer response, and we'll post that alongside the documentation that we're going to put up from the webinar. So really, I just want to end the session by thanking all of the speakers who have joined us today for the webinar. I also want to thank our relationship manager at IOSH, Tina Lee, and the support team for organising and hosting the webinar for us today. And remember, this is part one of a two-part webinar, with part two being the same time next week, where we have speakers from the RSPB to tell you how they're managing to reopen their nature reserves, speakers who are going to talk to us about statutory testing, which was mentioned today, and also speakers from the equine industry to talk to us about how they're getting back to working. So please look out for the registration. Registration can be found on the IOSH website, and a committee mailer will be sent out to the RIG members. And all that remains is to say thank you all for joining us today. We hope to engage with you again next week, and we'll end the webinar there. Thank you again.